Hey there, everyone. Welcome back, and thanks for being here. It's Dr. Mekahli, and today I'm really excited to walk you through our very first lesson on the basics of English grammar. So, we'll be going over the essential building blocks of sentences and how they all work together to create meaning. Now, before we get into it, if you haven't already watched the introduction video where I talk about myself and give an overview of the course, make sure to check that out when you get the chance. And as always, my email is right down the screen below, so don't hesitate to reach out. Alright, so we've already covered this in the previous video, but here's a quick look at the topics planned for this course. For now, we're focusing on Chapter 1, Introduction to Grammar, and in this lesson, we'll take a look at how sentences are built at a basic level, meaning that we'll be focusing on the structure, and in later lessons, we'll take a deeper look at their types and functions. So by the end of this lesson, you'll be able to define key grammatical terms, including words, phrases, clauses, and sentences at a basic level, identify their basic structural components, be able to differentiate between them based on their structures, and finally apply this knowledge so that you can construct clear and grammatically accurate sentences. Since this is our very first lesson on English grammar, it only makes sense to start at the very beginning with a simple but important question. What is grammar? Simply put, grammar is the set of rules that allow us to combine words into meaningful sentences. It's like the operating system of a language, and without that system, our words are just a bunch of noises. Why is that, you may ask? Because grammar controls everything. It controls how words are ordered in a sentence, meaning word arrangement and sentence construction. It controls how we show time using tenses and even how we pause using punctuation. And all of this for the sake of delivering complete, meaningful thoughts. Now, here's something interesting. Every language has its own unique grammar. Let's take the case of Arabic and English as an example. So in Arabic, many sentences begin with a verb, then they are followed by subject and the object. As shown in the example, أكل الولد تفاحة, which literally translates to ate the boy an apple. But in English, we flip that around. We usually start with the subject, then the verb, and then the object. So we would say, the boy ate an apple. So this example clearly shows how grammar controls word order and organizes meaning. Because even though both sentences express the same idea, the structure is different, and that's the result of their respective grammar. Now that we know what grammar is, let's zoom in a bit and take a look at what grammar is actually made of. Now, let me ask you this. What are the basic ingredients that you use to build a sentence? Okay, let's break it down together, starting with the word, the smallest meaningful independent unit of a language. Words like run, happy, student, or compete carry meaning on their own, but they don't express a complete idea. When we begin combining these words together, we create phrases, groups of words that work together as a single part of a sentence. For example, will be competing, a beautiful garden, or the boy. So phrases add meaning, but they still don't form a full thought. Why is that? Because they don't contain a subject and verb combination. And who does? That's right, clauses. So clauses are groups of words that contain a subject and a verb. And while some clauses express full, meaningful ideas, like she will be competing, other clauses lack this full meaning, such as because she will be competing. But the most important thing is that clauses must contain subjects plus verb combinations. When a clause expresses a complete idea, we call it a sentence. Because sentences are groups of words that contain subjects plus verb combinations and they express complete thoughts, such as she will be competing or she needs to rest because she will be competing. Now let's take a closer look at each one of these one by one. So I think you'll all agree with me when I say that words carry different kinds of information. Based on that, grammar groups words into categories called parts of speech. For example, words that name things, places, and ideas are referred to as nouns. Words that show actions or states are called verbs, words that describe nouns are called adjectives, and words that describe adjectives, verbs, or other adverbs are grouped under the category adverbs. Now, these four types of speech are called open word classes because they easily accept new members. Think of words like selfie, hashtag, or unfriend. They didn't exist a few years ago, but now they do, and they belong to these categories. On the other hand, we have closed word classes, which rarely change and rarely accept new members. These include pronouns, prepositions, and conjunctions. We'll go into more detail about each one of these later on, but for now just remember every word belongs to a part of speech, and knowing which one it is helps you understand how sentences are built and how grammar works. Next up, we move on to phrases. And as we mentioned earlier, these are groups of words that work together as a single unit within a sentence. But here's the most important thing that you need to remember about phrases. They never include subject and verb combinations, and they don't express a complete thought. So as a result, they can never stand alone as full sentences. Now, on the screen, you'll see some of the most common and predictable phrase patterns in English. These combinations show us how words typically group together to form phrases. So I would encourage you to create your own examples using these structures, because the more familiar you become with these patterns, the more confident and accurate you'll be when building full sentences of your own. And now we arrived at clauses, where meaning actually begins. However, not all clauses are equal when it comes to meaning. Let's take a look at this table where we compare the two main types of clauses, dependent and independent. As you can see, both types contain a subject and a verb. That's what makes them clauses in the first place. However, the differences lie in whether they express a complete thought. Independent clauses do. That's why they can stand alone as a full sentence, as shown in the example, the students are studying. However, dependent clauses do not because they rely on another clause to complete their meaning. For example, take the dependent clause because the students are studying. This leaves us wondering what happened because they are studying. Now, if we add an independent clause, we can get something like, because the students are studying, we need to keep the noise down to a minimum. So remember, independent clauses are complete ideas that can stand alone, while dependent clauses are incomplete ideas that need support. And now we've arrived at the top of the structure, the sentence. So far we've explored the structures of phrases and clauses, but this is where it gets interesting, because the structure of a sentence depends on the number and type of clauses it contains. Let's break this down. So if your sentence consists of only one independent clause, then we would call it a simple sentence, such as, I want to travel to Japan. However, if your sentence consists of two or more independent clauses, then we would call it a compound sentence. For example, I want to travel to Japan, first independent clause, but I don't have enough money yet, my second independent clause. Now let's move on to more complex structures, starting with the complex sentence, which consists of one independent clause and at least one dependent clause. So for example, I want to travel to Japan, my first independent clause, because I've always been fascinated by its culture. My first dependent clause that depends on the meaning of the first one to be complete. And finally, the compound complex sentences, which consist of at least two independent clauses and at least one dependent clause. For example, I want to travel to Japan, my first independent clause, Because I've always been fascinated by its culture, my first dependent clause, but I don't have enough money yet, my second independent clause. So to wrap up our lesson, I've included a couple of quick exercises here so you can see how well you've been following so far, and we'll correct them probably together in our next video, which will also serve as a quick refresher before we move forward. So give it your best shot and don't worry if you're unsure, you're here to learn and this is all part of the process. That's it for today's lesson. Thank you so much for following along. I hope this first look at grammar helped you feel a bit more confident and curious about how English works. See you in our next video, and until then, keep practicing, keep questioning, and I'll see you soon.